Good afternoon. How's everybody? Welcome to Frankenstein Tea. Welcome to the end of the Island Free Library work week. We are done. 3 o'clock on a Saturday. That's it for us, folks. We worked hard this week and had lots to deal with. And, we're happy to take a breather in the next few days. A little bit of a breather. So it is Saturday, August 8th, 8/8/20, and it turned into a beautiful sunny beach day here on Block Island. And so, for me, that means I'm going to try to go swimming. I'm a little pissed at myself. All week I brought my bathing suit to work to swim after work. And I don't know, today I don't have my bathing suit with me, and I'm not sure why, but I have to go home to get my suit to go swimming. But I can, that sort of harsh reality is something I can handle. It's not that terrible. I can do it. My dad just logged on. Hi, Dad. I sat in this chair this morning and started my work day with, I did a podcast recording. I do a podcast with my friend and comrade, Allison Warfel, and it's called Wake Up Well, Conversations for People and Planet. We did a great recording this morning. It was really very inspirational. We had a very good podcast going today. So if anybody listens to us, thanks for listening. If you don't, you should. They're good. I think you'll find them good. And there's over a dozen now on our podcast channel. Is that what it's called? Podcast channel? I don't know. On our podcast, we have more than a dozen episodes. So that was fun. That's what, and I did that right here in this chair. I recorded right here in this chair. So here I am. That was 8 o'clock this morning. Now it's 3:03 p.m. and I'm wrapping up this last day. And I have to say, when I was walking to work this morning, I was thinking about a story that I had read for this program. I read a lot of them, and I see what sort of percolates with me or resonates with me, or with a conversation I had with someone else, or what is this? I find stories in different ways, and this one kept coming back to me this morning, and almost to the point of where did I read that? It's like what I was asking myself. I'm like, what was that story? Where did I read that? And I'm pretty sure it's this story that I'm about to read to you. I didn't reread the whole thing just now, but I'm pretty sure this is what I had pre-read yesterday, and it's haunting me, and I'm going to share it with you today. Now, so it's from the same author as yesterday, Theodora Goss. This book is called In the Forest of Forgetting, and that was the story I read yesterday, In the Forest of Forgetting. And again, this is the fantasy section of the Island Free Library, not a section I tend to go to, although probably some of my favorites are in it, right? Mists of Avalon is and that's Marion Bradley. Is that right? Marion Bradley, Mists of Avalon. That's probably in that section. There's probably lots that I like. I do love a witch book. So that could be in that sci-fi fantasy section. Although sometimes around here we think witches, they're not fantasies. They're real. They need to go in fiction. They're not in sci-fi. It's one of those librarian debates we have here in this building. But this one, let's see if I can find it. It stuck with me to the point of where I just also took out a movie, because I think it'll compare with a movie that I've been thinking about watching. The movie I'm going to watch is Nureyev. I think it's called White Crown. Jeepers, I don't know what it is, but it's Nureyev and he's defecting. It's a movie about that. So where is this book? Where is this? No, here it is. Okay. So this book is called In the Forest of Forgetting. This is Theodora Goss. If you enjoyed her yesterday, I hope you enjoyed today. If you didn't enjoy it yesterday, stick in there with me. Give it a try today. This was published in 2006 by Prime Books. This is called Death Comes for Irvina. You have a visitor. There is something vaguely bovine about the nurse, whose name Irvina has once again forgotten. She reminds Irvina of the cows that she milked during the war. She would wake in the darkness before the rooster crowed from his perch on the hay wagon and fetch the water so her mother could make breakfast, boiled potatoes on which she dripped lard for flavoring. Then she would milk the cows, whose names were, she remembers, Rosa, Peroska. In winter, when a rim of ice formed on the milk pail, she would warm her hands in their breaths. When Rosa stopped giving milk, she was taken to the butcher, and Irvina cried for 3 days. Jesus Maria, said her mother, who always appeared in her memories wearing an apron. All those tears for a cow? Then she would collect the eggs. Surely, at first, there were eggs with the potatoes fried in lard. And later, there were no eggs, no lard, and finally, no potatoes, just boiled cabbage flavored with salt. The faces of the children at school became pale above their uniforms, which were ragged from being worn every day of the week, for doing chores or playing football. They had no other clothes. After her father came back from the war without Dennis or Odin, it was her mother's turn to cry. She could not, Irvina supposes, have cried for 3 years, but that is what she remembers. When she began school again with a new uniform and a red kerchief around her neck, her cheeks were damp with her mother's tears. Miss Kovacs, did you hear me? You have a visitor, someone from the ballet school. You want I should open the window? I don't know how you stand it in here under all those blankets. Her father did not want her to go to the ballet school. She's just a child, he said. Who will raise her in Budapest? You say she will be raised by the school, but I spent a week in the city during the war. It's filled with gypsies and prostitutes. Why should I send my daughter to such a place? Because, explained the teacher, his daughter had a talent for the ballet, and it was his duty to the party. And why, by the way, hadn't he joined the party? Didn't he know it was created to benefit farmers such as himself? To use her talent in the service of the People's Republic. Irvina listened from behind the kitchen door. Budapest was unreal to her as the frog prince in the fairy tale. Once, she had tried to kiss a frog she had found in the reeds by the river Tisa, with no result. Not that she wanted the frog to become a prince, but she wanted herself to become a princess with a gold ball. After she had milked the cows, she would stand by the barn door to make her reverence, and the cows would stare at her with appreciative brown eyes. But when her father returned from the war, alone and leaning heavily on a cane, her mother went back to milking the cows and collecting the eggs, while Irvina sat at the kitchen table, practicing her sums. It seemed strange that she should be taken to Budapest, because she could point her toes or arch her back better than the other children in her class, away from the mother who no longer told her fairy tales but cried into the cabbage soup, the father who told her to practice her sums so she could train to be an accountant, because on the farm she would never be as useful as a boy. The smell of exhaust and roasting eggplant fills the room. When she first moved to this apartment in Brooklyn, there was a Hungarian bakery across the street. Each morning, she would buy a slice of poppy seed bagel and eat it slowly in miniature bites with her morning coffee, as though to reward herself for a lifetime of hunger. At the ballet school in Budapest, breakfast was 2 pieces of toast, a boiled egg, and a sliced tomato. How hungry they were, the girls whose shoulder blades appeared through their leotards like vestigial wings. How proud they were of their hunger, the girls from farms as far away as Debrecen, as they watched their muscular waists become slender, watched the suppleness of their legs, which had once struggled in farm boots through fields to be mown for hay. Even the 14-year-olds drank their coffee black and smoked Bulgarian cigarettes. Now the Hungarian bakery has been replaced by an Armenian restaurant, but she can no longer eat sweets, she thinks approvingly, looking at her wrists, which have never been so thin, blue veins covered by layers of tulle, like the skirts of the swan's maidens surrounding Odette, who wears a crown that to the audience looks like gold, although Irvina knows that it is gilded papier-mâché. She has worn it often enough. Isn't that better? It's about time you got some fresh air. He says his name is Victor. He says he knows you from the ballet school. Miss Kovacs? Should I tell him you're too tired? Or should I tell him to come in? But it was not in Swan Lake that she first met Victor Boyd. She danced in Swan Lake the first time she came to New York. It was an era when cultural exchange was encouraged, and the Budapest Ballet had been invited to Carnegie Hall. From their rooms in a hotel on West 83rd Street, the ballerinas could hear the continual honking of taxis and smell hot dogs being sold in the park. Perhaps it was that, although she was Irvina Kovacs, whose photograph hung in the ballet school dormitory, who had a sponge cake named after her at Gundel's, who had received a standing ovation from Chairman Brezhnev himself. She had to share a room with Iona Nagy, who danced Odile. Perhaps that, from the car window as the ballerinas were driven to Carnegie Hall, she could see buildings taller than any she had seen in Budapest, or Prague, or even Moscow, whose windows reflected clouds. Perhaps she was tired of dancing Petipa, of Jardin and Nimes, or Bayadères endlessly pirouetting across the stage behind her. Perhaps it was only the smell of hot dogs. That day, while Siegfried began his pas de deux with Odile, she pulled out the hairpins that held on her crown, threw a coat that the janitor had left on a hook over her shoulders, and left through a back door. She waved her arms on the street until a taxi swerved to the curb, splashing her point shoes with mud. New York Ballet, she had said, repeating it 3 times until the driver understood. Her pronunciation was not so good in those days. He cursed her when, in front of the ballet school, she jumped out of the taxi and handed him a purse full of florins. The door opens again, and Victor walks into the room, looking as when she first saw him, in jeans and a t-shirt with Rolling Stones written on it, the blonde hair ragged around his shoulders, as awkward and graceful as a young swan. But no, this Victor has gray hair above his ears. This Victor is wearing a gray suit and a watch with Bulova written on it, and his name is Mr. Boyd. There are traces, still, in his movements of the boy to whom she once said, "If only you would apply yourself, Vic, you would be the greatest ballet dancer in the company, perhaps in the world. I mean, of course, after me." "Irvina," he says, taking her hands, which are as pale as milk, with blue veins running through them. She approves of their delicacy. "Madame Petrovna told me you were sick." She was already a teacher then, trained to succeed Larissa Petrovna, who had trained with the Kirov Ballet and was the most famous teacher at the ballet school. She had already danced in Paris, in London, in Tokyo, and in a public television special. But she could feel that her calloused feet, which had long ago conformed to the shape of a point shoe, were no longer as subtle as they had been, and that her back could no longer bend like a reed in the river current. She had already stopped dancing the roles that Mr. D had created for her, the blue note in Symphony in Blue, Elena in Three Sisters, the hyacinth girl. She was preparing with a pragmatism she supposed she had inherited from her father, who was lying in his grave in Svent Miklos, presumably no longer shocked that she had become a ballerina, which was no better than a prostitute, for the day when she could no longer dance. It had not been easy, realizing that she would soon have to stop dancing, even Odette. But one could still, she had thought, be useful. One could still have a sort of fame after one no longer wore the papier-mâché crown. She had thought of her mother, one of those interchangeable widows dressed in black at the Museum of Cultural History in Debrecen, who issued visitors felt slippers so the floors would not be scuffed. In her last letter, she had sounded almost happy, had written about a geranium she was growing in the apartment window. She had sent Irvina her gingerbread recipe. So, Irvina supposed, old age contracted one's interests until such things were enough. Perhaps, she thought, one day I will no longer care if the audience applauds. And then into the studio had walked Mr. D, leading a young man with ragged hair around his shoulders. He had said, "Irvina, this is Victor Boyd. You must teach him to dance." "But he is too old," Irvina had said. And then Victor had danced for her. She had fallen in love with him that day? Had she fallen in love with him that day? Or had it been later, on a day that they danced together in the studio, as the black pawn and white queen in chess, perhaps, or the herons in birds? He had been badly taught. It would take months before she could unteach him all he had learned, before she could teach him what he needed to know. Months in which, after mornings at the bar, he would meet with her individually. In the afternoons, with sunlight slanting through the studio windows, they would watch him move in the mirror while the pianist played Prokofiev or Tchaikovsky with the endless precision of a machine. What is he telling her? Did she mention that Juliet left me? The day Jim left for college, she said, "Now that the children are out of the house, there's no reason for us to stay together. Is there?" Her suitcase was already packed. "She's living with an investment banker on Long Island. But you're not interested in this. How are you doing, Irvina? Rosemary said you're getting excellent care." That's why the nurse reminds her of a cow. Rosemary is the name that she's forgotten. "So we're finally through." He begins to laugh, then stops abruptly. When did his face become wrinkled? She prefers it to the blank 20-year-old face he had when he told her, "I'm going to marry Juliet." "You warned me, didn't you?" he says, looking down at her hands, absent-mindedly running his fingers over the veins. "You said, Juliet Byro will never be more than a soloist, and if you marry her, you will never be the dancer you were meant to be." That was the night we danced Obertan and Titania together. It had been a benefit for the New York Diabetes Foundation, his debut and her farewell performance. They had danced Mr. D's A Midsummer's Night's Dream, the last ballet he would create for her, and she realized with chagrin one suitable for her diminished talents. Despite her elaborate costume, which was covered with leaves that had to be sewn on by hand, Titania's role was largely ornamental, while Oberon had been choreographed for a dancer who could leap like a stag from one end of the stage to the other. with Oberon's antlers on his head, dressed only in a bronze loincloth and bronze paint. Victor looked like a god of the forest. She pirouetted to meet him, the green tulle fastened to her shoulders, fluttering like wings. With fairies piqueing around them, peas blossom, cobweb, moth, and mustard seed, students from the ballet school. She met him not in the embrace Mr. D had choreographed, but with a kiss worthy of a forest god and the queen of fairies. And afterward, he had told her, behind the curtain, I'm going to marry Juliet. So here I am. This morning, I met with the planning committee. This afternoon, I'm going to a fundraiser for the school. He laughs again, uncomfortably, then abruptly leans forward until his forehead is resting on the backs of her hands. You were right, you know. His voice is muffled, but she hears it as clearly as the call before the raising of a curtain. You were right about everything, but you scared the shit out of me. You were the great Irvina Kovacs. And what was I? A kid from Oklahoma who grew up on basketball and got stuck in a dance class because the coach thought it would help him jump. He raises his head and looks at her so that she sees herself in his eyes, the gray hair lying on the pillow, the face like a wrinkled sheet. I just wanted you to know that. There is something she must tell him about mornings during the war when she milked the cows and nothing for breakfast but potatoes. She must tell him that he has misunderstood her, but it is she who has misunderstood. The revelation comes slowly, like sunlight filtering through the mud in the river Tiza, illuminating the carp that slide beneath the surface. It wasn't you I loved, she wants to tell him. It wasn't you after all. It was, but she's not certain how to finish. She feels her eyebrows extend into antennae. He takes off his jacket, unbuttons his white shirt. It's not the body she remembers. The shoulders almost too muscular for the waist, which was as slender as a girl's. This waist has filled out, but it is still firm, the skin glittering like bronze. And his kiss, as he bends over the bed, is still the kiss of a forest god. His antlers rise like the branches of an oak tree. Then he moves away from her in a series of somersaults and stands in front of the window, through which she can hear the noise of traffic, holding out his hands as though waiting for her to join him. Did you have a nice visit with Mr. Boyd? Asks Rosemary. He looks so distinguished, like a doctor on General Hospital. I bet he was a dreamboat when he was a boy. Oberon stands in front of the window, antlered and naked except for a bronze loincloth. You want I should bring you some lunch? I made chicken broth with dumplings, just like you taught me. The chair on which he had been sitting has sprouted, and the forest is rising around her, cardboard branches casting shadows under the spotlight of a moon. Music is playing from an unseen orchestra, and the fairies flit through the forest on wings of tulle, with antennae painted over their eyes. In the forest, Oberon is waiting. Yes, she thinks, this is it. This is what I wanted all along. Titania raises from her bank of flowers. Miss Kovacs? She pirouettes, reveling in the strength of her feet, the suppleness of her back as she leans over Oberon's arm, looking toward the darkness where an audience is watching. She sees her mother holding a potted geranium, her father dour and disapproving, Odin and Dennis, a teacher from her school in Svens Miklos waving a red flag, students she remembers from ballet class, taking notes. Larissa Petrovna, swinging her famous string of pearls in time to the music. Even Rosa is standing in the aisle. She can see them all, in the darkness, beyond the footlights. Perhaps, she thinks, for what I have done or not done, I have been forgiven. In the wings, hidden behind a curtain, Mr. D is nodding his approval. She smiles at him, then looks again at Oberon as the music begins for their pas de deux. Theodore Goss, In the Forest of Forgetting. That short story was called Death Comes for Irvina. Not sure if my mom is out there, but to mom and dad, like, now that I've read it through a second time, not surprising that I loved it, right? I was a bit of a ballet head when I was a kid. Not surprising. Went to lots of ballet, still go to the ballet, like to think about the ballet. Gonna go home and watch my ballet movie about Nureyev. All right, I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for coming. This is Frankenstein Tea, a daily short story for adult listeners with an afternoon check-in. Go check in with yourselves. Enjoy something cool to drink. If you're on Block Island, get some fresh air. If you're anywhere, get some fresh air. Poppy, kisses to Tansy and Jeff and Linz and Maddie and Mrs. Faust. Is Mrs. Faust with you? Oh, I hope she listened. She might have enjoyed that. I for some reason, I think her and Maddie are both ballet people as well. Go swimming, my dad says. Yes, good. Yay. Hi, Mrs. Faust. Hi, Maddie. All right, I love you all. I'll be here tomorrow, Dad. Check in again tomorrow. I hope everybody in VT checks in and has a great 24 hours until then. All right, I love you. Be well, everybody. Bye, Mom. Peace.